Every marriage has rooms, rooms that both people walk through freely, rooms where the children play and the dinners happen and the ordinary life unfolds. But some marriages also have a room that only one person enters, a room with a lock on the inside, a room where one person keeps the thing they have never been able to say, not because they do not trust the other person, but because saying it would change the shape of everything. For 21 years, Sandra Whitfield had a room like that. She walked past it every day. She lived around it. She built an entire life on the floors above it, a life with a husband who adored her and children who thought they knew her and a community that respected her. And inside that locked room was a single truth, one sentence, 7 words, that she had never spoken out loud to the man she had shared a bed with for over 2 decades. On a Thursday afternoon in November 2025, on the stage of Family Feud, a survey question found the key. And when that room opened, what came out of it did not destroy Sandra Whitfield's marriage. It rebuilt it from the foundation up. Steve Harvey, who had been hosting the show long enough to think he had seen every kind of human revelation, stood on that stage and watched a woman set herself free with 7 words, and he later said it was the single most transformative thing he had ever witnessed in his career. If you believe that the things we cannot say are sometimes the things that matter most, subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications. Because Sandra's 7 words will change the way you think about honesty, sacrifice, and what it really means to know the person you love. The Whitfield family from Durham, North Carolina, arrived at the Family Feud studio looking like the kind of family that holds a neighborhood together. There were 5 of them. James Whitfield, 49, a fire captain at Station 7 of the Durham Fire Department. His wife, Sandra, 46, the office manager at a pediatric dental practice. Their son, Malik, 23, a second-year law student at North Carolina Central University. Their daughter, Zoe, 17, a high school junior and the starting point guard on her school's basketball team. And Sandra's grandmother, Miss Opal, 78, a retired seamstress who had spent 45 years making wedding dresses at a bridal shop in Chapel Hill, and who had agreed to be the 5th member because, as she told Sandra, "I have been praying for a reason to travel farther than the Piggly Wiggly. This will do." They wore matching navy blue shirts with the family name printed on the back in gold. They arrived in James's truck, a red Ford F-250 that still smelled faintly of fire station coffee. They were warm, loud, and obviously happy. James held the studio door open for every member of the family and then held it for the family behind them. Sandra carried a tote bag full of snacks for the children, even though both children were old enough to drive themselves. Malik had his arm around his sister. Zoe was texting. Miss Opal was examining the studio lights with the frank curiosity of a woman who had never been inside a television building and intended to inspect every square inch of it before the day was done. James Whitfield was the man everyone wanted as their neighbor. He had been a firefighter for 24 years, the last 8 as captain of Station 7, which served one of the most densely populated areas of Durham. He was the kind of officer who ran into buildings when everyone else ran out, and who also remembered every crew member's birthday, every spouse's name, and every child's sports schedule. His crew called him Cap. His neighbors called him James. His wife called him Jay. His children called him Dad, with the easy frequency of kids who had never once doubted that their father would be there when they needed him. James had grown up in Haiti, one of Durham's historically black neighborhoods, the middle child of a postal worker and a bus driver. His parents were married for 41 years before his father passed away from complications of diabetes. His mother, Vera, was still alive, still in the same house, still walking to the post office every morning even though she had been retired for 6 years because, she said, "The walk is the only thing keeping me upright." James joined the fire department at 25 because he wanted to protect people. It was not a more complicated motivation than that. He had watched his neighborhood struggle with poverty, with violence, with the slow erosion of services that affected communities like his disproportionately, and he decided that the most direct way to help was to be the person who showed up when things went wrong. He had been showing up ever since. Sandra Whitfield was the infrastructure of the family. Not its heart, not its soul. Those words were too soft for what Sandra did. She was the scheduling, the budgeting, the meal planning, the insurance paperwork, the school forms, the dentist appointments, the college applications, the roof repair coordination, the Christmas card list, the remembering of every teacher's name and every neighbor's dog's name and every cousin's birthday. She ran the family the way she ran the dental office, with a precision and efficiency that made the chaos invisible. People who met Sandra thought her life was easy because it looked organized. It was organized because Sandra made it that way every day through a level of constant, invisible labor that would have crushed most people, but that Sandra performed with a competence so consistent that it had become, ironically, the reason nobody noticed it. Sandra had grown up in Roxborough, a small town about 30 miles north of Durham. Her mother had died in a car accident when Sandra was 14. Her father, a man named Walter, tried to hold things together but could not manage his grief and 3 children simultaneously. He started drinking. The house fell apart. Sandra's older brother left at 17. Her younger sister went to live with an aunt. Sandra stayed. She stayed because someone had to take care of her father, and because leaving felt like a betrayal of her mother, who had held the family together and whose absence had proven that without the person doing the invisible work, everything collapsed. Sandra cooked for her father. She cleaned the house. She kept herself in school through sheer discipline. She graduated with honors. She earned a scholarship to NC Central, where she met James during her sophomore year. She married James at 25. And she loved him. She loved him with the deep, uncomplicated certainty of a woman who had grown up in chaos and had found in this steady, reliable, courageous man the thing she had been searching for since she was 14 years old. Stability, safety, the promise that things would not fall apart. James was everything Sandra's childhood had not been. He was present. He was consistent. He came home when he said he would. He did not drink. He did not disappear. He was the wall between Sandra and the fear that had lived in her since the day her mother died. The fear that everything could be taken away without warning, and that the only defense against it was to hold on tighter, work harder, and never, ever let go of the things you loved. But the thing Sandra had never told James, the 7 words locked in the room she never opened, was connected to the very foundation of why she loved him, and why she had chosen him, and why she held everything so tightly. The secret was not about James. It was about Sandra. It was about the girl from Roxborough who had watched her mother die and her father crumble, and who had spent the next 32 years constructing a life so stable, so organized, so meticulously controlled that nothing could ever collapse again. The secret was the cost of that construction, the thing she had given up, the part of herself she had buried so deep that she had almost convinced herself it no longer existed. Sandra had wanted to be a nurse, not a dental office manager, a registered nurse. It had been her dream since she was 12, when her mother was hospitalized for 3 days after a gallbladder surgery, and Sandra had watched the nurses move through the ward with a competence and compassion that made her feel, for the first time, that the world had people in it whose entire job was to make sure things did not fall apart. She wanted to be one of those people. She had the grades for it. She had the aptitude. Her guidance counselor at the high school in Roxborough had written her a recommendation letter for NC Central's pre-nursing program that described her as the most naturally suited candidate for nursing I have encountered in 18 years of counseling. Sandra was accepted into the program. She attended for 1 semester, and then she dropped out, not because she failed, not because she lost interest. Because her father's drinking had worsened, the house was about to be foreclosed on, and Sandra needed to work full-time to send money home to keep the lights on and the roof over her father's head. She switched to a general studies degree that she could finish faster, graduated, got a job as a receptionist at a dental office, and began the long process of building the life that would become the Whitfield family. She never told James about the nursing dream. She never told anyone. She folded it up, placed it in the room, locked the door, and built her life over the top of it. She told herself it was practical. She told herself it was the right decision. She told herself that the life she had, the husband, the children, the house, the stability, was worth more than any career she might have had. And all of those things were true. But they were also the kind of truths that function as walls, keeping the grief of what might have been from reaching the surface where it would have to be felt. Miss Opal knew. She had always known. Opal was Sandra's maternal grandmother, the woman who had stepped in after Sandra's mother died and who had been the steadiest presence in Sandra's life for the last 32 years. She had watched Sandra give up the nursing program. She had watched her granddaughter bury the dream with the same disciplined efficiency she brought to everything else. And she had grieved it quietly, the way grandmothers grieve, by watching and praying and waiting for the moment when the truth would find its way out. On the morning of the taping, Miss Opal had held Sandra's hand in the car and said, without context, "The Lord has a way of bringing things to the surface, baby girl, even the things we bury the deepest." Sandra had smiled and patted her grandmother's hand and assumed she was talking about something spiritual. She was not. She was talking about the room. The Whitfield family was matched against the Gruber family from Indianapolis, Indiana. Steve Harvey opened the show with his customary warmth, and the audience responded with immediate affection for both families. During introductions, Steve reached James and asked how long he had been a firefighter. 24 years, sir," Steve said. "Sir, you're a fire captain who saves lives and you're calling me sir?" James grinned. My mama taught me manners, Mr. Harvey. The audience laughed. Steve pointed at the camera. I like this family already. When Steve reached Sandra, she said, I'm the office manager at a pediatric dentist. I keep things running. Steve smiled. I bet you do. When he reached Miss Opal, she took his hand in both of hers, looked up at him, and said, Mr. Harvey, I have been waiting 40 years to meet you. You look even better in person. The audience roared. Steve said, Miss Opal, I am going to adopt you. The first 2 rounds were competitive and fun. The Whitfields won the first round cleanly, with James giving an enthusiastic face-off answer and the family playing as a tight unit. Sandra provided 2 correct answers with her characteristic precision. Malik contributed solid responses. Zoe scored points with an answer that made the audience laugh. Miss Opal gave an answer that was technically wrong but so charmingly delivered that the audience applauded anyway. The second round was closer, but the Whitfields pulled it out with a steal in the final seconds. The energy was high. The family was clicking. Everything was proceeding exactly as a normal, entertaining, forgettable episode of Family Feud was supposed to proceed. The third round introduced the question that found the key. Name something a wife has never told her husband. The question appeared on the board in bright letters, and the audience murmured with anticipation. It was a classic feud question designed to produce funny answers about shopping receipts and real opinions about mothers-in-law. The Whitfield family was playing the round. Answers came. Malik said, how much she really spends. Correct number 2. Zoe said that she doesn't like his cooking. Correct number 5. James said that she thinks about her ex. The audience laughed. Correct number 3. Miss Opal said where she hides the good chocolate. Not on the board. 1 strike. Then it was Sandra's turn. 2 answers remained. Sandra walked to the podium and placed her hands on the surface. She looked at the board. She looked at Steve. And then her eyes moved without her permission to the left, where James was standing at the family podium, watching her with the easy, adoring gaze he had given her every day for 21 years. The gaze of a man who believed he knew his wife completely. The gaze that was about to learn otherwise. Something shifted in Sandra's face. It was not a decision. It was a collapse of the structure she had built, the way a dam does not decide to break, but simply reaches the moment when the water behind it exceeds the strength of the wall. 32 years of holding. 32 years of walking past the locked room. 32 years of telling herself the dream did not matter, that the life she had was enough, that the girl who wanted to be a nurse had grown up and moved on. And then a game show question asked her directly what she had never told her husband, and the dam broke. Sandra said, in 7 words that were spoken so quietly the studio had to strain to hear them, I gave up my dream for him. The studio went still, not silent the way it goes silent after a funny answer or a surprising answer. Still. The way a room becomes still when someone speaks a truth that has been stored under pressure for so long that its release changes the atmospheric conditions of the space it enters. The board revealed the answer. Her dreams was the number 1 answer, 46 points, the highest single answer of the episode, but the board was irrelevant. Nobody in the studio was looking at the board. They were looking at Sandra, and they were looking at James. James Whitfield stood at the family podium with an expression that the audience would never forget. It was not anger. It was not confusion. It was the expression of a man hearing a frequency he had never heard before and trying to make sense of it. His eyebrows were drawn together. His lips were slightly parted. His hands were still at his sides. He was looking at his wife with the concentrated intensity of someone who has just been told that the house they have lived in for 21 years has a room they have never seen. Your dream, James said. His voice was steady but searching. Sandra, what dream? Sandra was still at the podium. Her hands were flat on the surface. Her eyes were wet, but the tears had not fallen. She was holding them the way she held everything, with discipline, with control, with the practiced composure of a woman who had been managing the unmanageable for her entire adult life. She looked at James, and for the first time in 21 years of marriage, she let the composure go. I wanted to be a nurse, Jay, she said, her voice cracked on the word nurse. Since I was 12 years old, I was accepted into the program at Central. I went for 1 semester. And then Daddy started drinking worse and the house was about to go and I had to work full-time and I dropped out and I never went back. She paused. And I never told you because by the time we met, I had already decided it didn't matter anymore. But it mattered, Jay, it always mattered. And I have been carrying it for so long that I forgot I was carrying it until just now. James took 1 step forward. Then he stopped, not because he did not want to go to her. Because the information was arriving faster than his body could process it. His wife had had a dream, a real dream. A specific, achievable, meaningful dream, and she had given it up. Not for him specifically, but for the circumstances that predated him, for the father who fell apart after her mother died, for the family that needed her income, for the life that demanded she be practical instead of passionate. And then she had married James and built a new life and never told him any of it. She had managed his household and raised his children and sat in the dental office processing insurance claims, while somewhere inside her there was a girl who had wanted to be a nurse and who had been told, by the world and by herself, that the dream was over. Steve Harvey stood at his podium. He did not speak. He watched the exchange between Sandra and James with the attentiveness of a man who understood that what was happening on his stage was too important to interrupt. He could see the complexity. This was not a secret that someone had kept out of malice or deception. This was a dream that a woman had buried out of necessity and then paved over with 21 years of devoted, disciplined, invisible labor. And the paving had been so thorough, so complete, so convincingly permanent, that even the woman herself had almost forgotten what was underneath. Miss Opal moved. She stepped forward from the far end of the podium and walked to Sandra. She was 78 years old, and she moved with the deliberate, unhurried pace of a woman who had spent 45 years threading needles and pinning hems, a woman whose entire life had been defined by the patient, precise work of making things beautiful for other people's most important days. She reached Sandra and took her granddaughter's face in both hands, the hands of a seamstress, small and strong and steady. She looked into Sandra's eyes and said, in a voice that carried the authority of 3 generations, "It's time, baby. Let it out. All of it." Sandra broke. The tears came with a force that startled even her. She had not cried about the nursing dream in over 20 years because crying about it would have meant admitting it still lived inside her. And admitting it still lived meant admitting she had lost something. And admitting she had lost something meant the carefully constructed stability of her life had a crack in it. And Sandra Whitfield did not allow cracks, until now. James crossed the remaining distance to his wife. He took her in his arms. He held her the way a firefighter holds someone he has just pulled from a building, with the urgency of a man who understands that the rescue is not over just because the person is out of the flames. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said into her hair. His own voice was breaking. 21 years, Sandra. Why didn't you tell me?" Sandra, her face pressed into his chest, said the truest thing she had ever said in their marriage. "Because I was afraid that if I said it out loud, I would have to feel how much it cost me, and I didn't think I could feel that and still hold everything together." Steve Harvey finally spoke. He walked to the center of the stage, and when he spoke, his voice was thick and measured. "I need to say something to everyone in this room and everyone who is going to watch this at home." He paused. "What you just witnessed is not a woman revealing a secret. It is a woman releasing a weight that she has been carrying since she was a teenager. A weight she picked up when her mother died and her father fell apart and somebody had to hold the family together, and that somebody was her. She has been holding things together ever since. For her father, for her husband, for her children, for everyone. And the one thing she put down, the one thing she sacrificed to keep holding everything else was the dream of being the person she wanted to be." He looked at James. "And this man, this fire captain who runs into burning buildings for a living, did not know, not because she didn't trust him, but because she trusted herself more. She trusted herself to carry it alone. She trusted herself to be strong enough, and she was strong enough, for 21 years. He paused. But strong enough and whole are not the same thing. And what I hope everyone takes from this moment is that the people who hold everything together are sometimes the people who are missing a piece of themselves. And they deserve to have someone ask them what they put down, because they will never volunteer it. You have to ask." The audience rose. The standing ovation was immediate and overwhelming. 200 people on their feet, weeping and applauding, recognizing in Sandra Whitfield every mother, every wife, every sister, every woman who had set aside her own dream to hold someone else's life together. The game resumed after the ovation. Steve gave the family the option to stop. James looked at Sandra, who wiped her eyes, took a breath, and said, "Mr. Harvey, I have been holding myself together for 32 years. I am not going to fall apart over fast money." The audience laughed through their tears. Steve grinned. "Lady, you are something else." Malik went first. Emotional but sharp, he scored 131 points. The audience cheered him with an energy that went beyond the game. Then Sandra walked to the podium. The studio fell to absolute silence. Steve began. "Name something every woman deserves a chance to do." "Follow her dream," Sandra said. "Name something a mother puts last." "Herself." "Name something that never goes away no matter how long you ignore it." "Who you were meant to be." Steve paused at that answer. The audience inhaled. "Name something you would tell your younger self. It's not too late." "Name something that makes all the hard years worth it." Sandra paused. 1 second, too. Then she looked toward the partition where she knew her family was waiting, and she said with a smile that held 21 years of love and 32 years of grief and the first fragile breath of something new, "A second chance." The board revealed the answers. Follow her dream for something every woman deserves. Number 1 answer, 43 points. The audience surged. Herself for something a mother puts last. Number 1 answer, 38 points. 2 in a row. Who you were meant to be for something that never goes away. Number 1 answer, 30 points. 3 consecutive number 1 answers. The studio was electric with an energy that felt less like a game show and more like a revival. It's not too late for something you'd tell your younger self. Number 1 answer, 28 points. 4 in a row. People were screaming. Steve was pacing. A second chance for something that makes the hard years worth it. Steve turned to the board. The answer lit up. Number 1, 33 points. Perfect score, 172 points. Combined with Malik's 131, the Whitfield family had 303 points and the $20,000 prize. The celebration that followed was the most intensely personal the show had ever recorded. Malik and Zoe came running out and engulfed their mother. James wrapped himself around all three of them. Miss Opal stood to the side, her hands clasped, her eyes closed, tears running down her cheeks, and on her face was the expression of a woman who had prayed for this moment for 32 years and was watching it arrive. Steve walked to Sandra one final time. He stood in front of her and said something that was not for television. It was for her. "Sandra, 5 number 1 answers, every single one about the thing you never said. You know what that tells me? It tells me that the truth was always right there at the surface, waiting. It was the number 1 answer every time. The most common, the most universal, which means you were never alone in what you were feeling. Every woman in this audience and every woman watching at home has put something down, and they heard you say out loud what they have been feeling in silence. You did that, in 5 answers, on a game show stage." He shook his head. "That is not a game, Sandra. That is a gift." Sandra looked at him through wet eyes and said, "Mr. Harvey, I've been giving gifts to other people my whole life. This is the first time I've ever given one to myself." Steve wiped his face with both hands and walked away before the cameras could see him cry. Backstage, the Whitfield family sat together for nearly an hour. Steve Harvey joined them for the first 20 minutes. He spoke with James and Sandra together, telling them that what he had witnessed was a turning point not just for their family, but for his understanding of what his show could be. He told Sandra that her 7 words, "I gave up my dream for him," were the most important words ever spoken on his stage. Sandra said, "They weren't about James, Mr. Harvey. They were about me. I gave up my dream for the situation I was in. James just happened to be the life I built over the top of it." Steve said it was the most self-aware thing he had ever heard anyone say. He spoke with Miss Opal. He told her that her moment with Sandra, holding her face and saying, "It's time, baby," was one of the most powerful things he had ever witnessed. Opal looked at him with the direct, clear-eyed gaze of a woman who had spent 78 years on this earth and had no time left for anything but the truth. "Mr. Harvey, I have been making wedding dresses for 45 years. I have put thousands of women into the most important outfit of their lives. And the one thing I've learned is that every woman has a dress she never got to wear, a version of herself she never got to become. My Sandra had a dress, she never got to wear it. Today she finally took it out of the closet." Steve said, "Miss Opal, that is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said to me." Opal said, "Well, I'm a seamstress. Beautiful is what I do." The episode aired 5 weeks later. The response was immediate and seismic. The clip of Sandra saying, "I gave up my dream for him," was viewed over 70 million times in its first 72 hours. The full sequence from the answer through Miss Opal's "It's time, baby," through James crossing the stage through Sandra's perfect fast money round, was viewed over 190 million times within its first month. It was translated into 29 languages. It became one of the 5 most watched Family Feud clips of all time. The hashtag "The Dream She Never Told" trended worldwide for 10 consecutive days. It was adopted by millions of women who recognized Sandra's story as their own. They posted in enormous numbers, and the stories that emerged formed a collective portrait of female sacrifice that stunned the world with its scale. Former pre-med students who had dropped out to support families. Artists who had stopped painting when children arrived. Athletes who had abandoned training when caretaking responsibilities multiplied. Musicians who had put instruments in closets. Writers who had closed notebooks. In every story, the pattern was the same. A dream had existed. A circumstance had intervened. The dream had been buried, and it had never stopped hurting. The movement was described by a sociologist at Stanford as the largest spontaneous documentation of women's deferred dreams in the history of social media. James Whitfield's response was both immediate and structural, because James was a man who responded to crises with action. The week after the taping, he sat with Sandra at the kitchen table and asked her to tell him everything. The nursing program, the semester she completed, the courses she loved, the patients she had imagined caring for, the way her mother's hospitalization had planted the seed. He listened for over 2 hours without interrupting. When Sandra finished, James took out a yellow legal pad and said, "Okay, let's build a plan." It was the most James thing he could have done, and it was exactly what Sandra needed, not sympathy, a plan. Within a month, Sandra had contacted NC Central's nursing program to inquire about re-enrollment. The admissions office, which had been inundated with inquiries after the episode aired, fast-tracked her application. Sandra was accepted into an accelerated BSN program for adult learners, a 2-year track that would allow her to complete her degree while continuing to work part-time. The dental practice, where she had worked for 16 years, gave her a flexible schedule without reducing her benefits. Her employer told a local reporter, "Sandra has been the backbone of this office for 16 years. If she needs to adjust her hours to become the nurse she was always supposed to be, we will adjust around her. That's the least she deserves." The financial reality was challenging. Sandra's reduced hours meant a reduced income, and nursing school carried its own costs. James adjusted. He picked up overtime shifts. He reorganized the household budget with the same precision Sandra had brought to it for 21 years, except now he was the one doing it. He told a reporter, "My wife managed our finances for 2 decades so that everything ran smoothly. Now it's my turn. She held the house together so I could fight fires. I'm going to hold the house together so she can become a nurse. That's not sacrifice. That's partnership." Malik and Zoe both responded to their mother's revelation in ways that reshaped their own trajectories. Malik, in his second year of law school, added a focus on healthcare policy after watching his mother's experience illuminate the barriers that prevented working adults from returning to education. He wrote a law review article about credential accessibility for adult learners that was published and cited by policy researchers. Zoe, the high school junior, started a peer mentoring program at her school called The Dream Room, a space where students could talk openly about the futures they wanted without fear of judgment or the practical pressures that often silenced those conversations. The program expanded to 3 other schools in the Durham district within a year. Zoe told her mother, "You taught me that holding everything in is not strength. Strength is saying the thing you're afraid to say." Sandra said it was the proudest moment of her life as a parent. Steve Harvey invited the Whitfield family back for a follow-up segment 9 months after the original episode. When Sandra walked onto the stage wearing scrubs for the first time, the audience's response shook the building. The standing ovation lasted over 2.5 minutes. Sandra was in her second semester of the accelerated nursing program. She was carrying a full course load while working 25 hours a week at the dental office. She was exhausted and exhilarated and alive in a way that her family had never seen before. James stood beside her with the particular pride of a man who had watched his wife transform before his eyes, not into someone new, but into someone she had always been. During the segment, Sandra spoke with the composed clarity that had defined her entire life, except now the composure was not armor. It was foundation. 9 months ago, I said 7 words on this stage that I had been holding for 32 years. I said I gave up my dream. And the response from this audience, from the internet, from women all over the world, showed me something I had never understood before. I was not the only one. Millions of women have a room like the one I had, a locked room with a dream inside it that they buried because life demanded something else from them. She paused. I am 46 years old. I am in nursing school. I study at the kitchen table at 11 at night after my daughter goes to bed. I go to clinicals on Saturday mornings at 6 a.m. I am the oldest person in most of my classes, and I have never been happier in my entire life. She looked at James. Because the man I married did not hear my truth and pull away. He heard my truth and pulled out a legal pad, and that is the kind of love that every woman who is holding a buried dream deserves. The audience erupted. Steve revealed during the segment that Sandra's episode had inspired the largest initiative in Family Feud history. In partnership with 3 national foundations and a consortium of nursing education programs, the show had established the Second Chance Scholarship, a $10 million fund providing tuition support, childcare, and mentorship for adult women returning to nursing education. The program was open to women over 30 who had begun but not completed nursing degrees due to financial or family circumstances. In its first 6 months, the scholarship had funded 320 women across 28 states. Steve said, "Sandra Whitfield gave up her dream at 21 years old. She got it back at 46. This program exists to make sure no woman has to wait 25 years for a second chance. Sandra covered her face with both hands. Miss Opal, sitting in the front row of the audience, stood up, pointed at her granddaughter and said, loud enough for every microphone to capture, "That's my baby, and she's going to be the best nurse this country has ever seen." The audience lost its collective mind. Miss Opal's contribution to the legacy extended beyond the stage. At 78, she became an unexpected advocate for intergenerational support for women's education. She gave interviews from her living room in Chapel Hill, usually while hemming a dress, and she said the same thing in every one. "I made wedding dresses for 45 years. I put women into the outfit for the biggest day of their lives. But the biggest day of a woman's life is not her wedding. It's the day she decides to become who she was always meant to be. For my Sandra, that day happened on a game show stage. But for most women, it happens quietly at a kitchen table at 2 in the morning when they finally admit to themselves that the dream is still alive." She paused in one interview, looked at the camera, and said, "If you are a woman watching this and you have a dream you buried, I want you to know something. Fabric doesn't expire. Neither do dreams. You can take them out of the closet at any age and they will still fit." The clip was viewed over 30 million times. It was printed on posters. It was shared in women's groups and church meetings and nursing school orientations. A textile artist in Asheville stitched the quote into a quilt that was displayed at the National Women's History Museum. 2 years after the episode aired, Sandra Whitfield graduated from NC Central University's accelerated BSN program. She was 48 years old. The graduation ceremony was attended by her family, by Miss Opal, who was wheeled to the front row in a chair because her knees had finally won the argument with her stubbornness, by Steve Harvey, who flew in from Lowe's Angels, and by over 100 women who had received second-chance scholarships and who had traveled from across the country to watch the woman who had started it all walk across the stage. When Sandra's name was called, the applause was so sustained that the university had to pause the ceremony. James was standing in the audience with tears streaming down his face, holding a sign that Zoe had made. It said 4 words, "She always was one." Sandra accepted her diploma, held it above her head, and looked directly at Miss Opal. The old woman, sitting in her wheelchair with her sewing hands folded in her lap, smiled, nodded once, and mouthed 2 words that Sandra felt more than heard. The dress. The dress she never got to wear. The version of herself she never got to become. Sandra was wearing it now. Sandra Whitfield is now a registered nurse at Duke University Hospital. She works on the cardiac floor because she says, the heart is where everything starts and where everything matters most. She wears her NC Central pin on her badge next to her RN credential. She arrives early for every shift. She knows every patient's name. She holds the hands of frightened families in the waiting room the same way the nurses held her hand when she was 12 years old and her mother was in recovery. She is, by every measure, exactly the nurse she was always meant to be. On the wall of the Whitfield family home, next to James's fire department commendations and Malik's law school acceptance letter and Zoe's basketball trophies, there are 2 framed items. The first is Sandra's diploma. The second is a photograph from the Family Feud stage, the moment Miss Opal took Sandra's face in her hands and said, "It's time, baby." Sandra looks at them both every morning before she leaves for her shift. The diploma reminds her of what she earned. The photograph reminds her of what it cost. And every morning, as she walks to her car in the pre-dawn light, she carries both of those truths with the same steady, disciplined grace she has carried everything her entire life. Except now, for the first time, she is carrying them toward the life she was always meant to live. Not the life she built over the top of a buried dream. The life that was inside the locked room all along, waiting for the moment when someone or something finally found the key. If this story reached you, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Share this with a woman who put something down a long time ago and has never picked it back up. Share it with a mother, a wife, a sister, a friend who has been holding everything together so long she forgot she was missing a piece of herself. And if you are that woman, hear what Sandra finally learned at 46 years old. The dream is still in the room. The door is not locked anymore, and it is never, ever too late to walk through it.